Marissa sat by the window, sunlight spilling across her notebook, tracing the outline of the words she had been meaning to write. Daniel, her husband of 5 years, was in the kitchen humming softly, the scent of brewed coffee drifting through the air. On the surface, their home looked like the embodiment of domestic bliss. Framed photos of vacations, candles lined up neatly on the mantel, and the faint strains of classical music humming from hidden speakers. She smiled faintly, recalling the first time he had kissed her on the balcony of that tiny apartment, promising forever. But beneath the warmth, shadows lingered. Daniel's hand rested on hers with a grip that was too firm, his eyes lingering a second too long whenever she spoke to a friend. He had a way of redirecting conversations, of turning a gentle disagreement into a quiet submission. Marissa told herself it was love, his way of caring, but a chill sometimes crawled up her spine when she thought about the cold precision behind his smiles. "I packed your lunch," she called softly, her voice carrying into the kitchen. "Thank you," Daniel replied. Not looking up, his tone polite but distant, she noted the slight edge in his voice, almost imperceptible, like a blade disguised as silk. She thought about the weekend trip they had taken, laughing at the seaside, sharing ice cream, and pretending the small arguments, the ones over trivial things like which movie to watch, didn't sting. Those tiny disagreements seemed to disappear in the daylight, but Marissa felt them nest in the corners of her mind, festering quietly. When she passed the hallway mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself staring back. A woman with bright eyes, a forced calm in her posture, but beneath it, a heartbeat tinged with unease. Sometimes she wondered if anyone could see what she saw, the subtle shifts in Daniel's expressions when he was displeased, or the way he monitored her movements, careful not to seem intrusive but never missing a detail. Yet, despite it all, she loved him with a depth she could barely name. That love had a weight to it, heavy enough to ignore the unease, heavy enough to bind her to him even when the air between them grew taut with unspoken tensions. The morning continued in its perfect rhythm, a fragile illusion. And as Marissa poured her coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that perfection had a shadow, and shadows, once noticed, could not easily be ignored. Marissa's phone buzzed on the counter. A message from her sister, Elena. "Lunch tomorrow? I haven't seen you in weeks." She stared at it, fingers hovering, then hesitated. Daniel had mentioned earlier that he didn't want her going out that week. Too many errands, too much traffic. A small voice in her chest told her she could ignore him, but the familiar knot of tension twisted in her stomach. She typed back a vague reply, promising to see if she could make it. Her friends noticed her absence more than her family did. Invitations went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. Once at a coffee shop, she had tried to laugh through the unease as friends gushed about weddings and promotions, but Daniel's warnings echoed in her head. "Be careful. People can't be trusted. Don't overshare." She had laughed politely, but the echo of isolation clung to her like a shadow. Later that evening, Daniel entered the living room without knocking, placing his hand on her shoulder. "You're distracted," he said softly, almost tenderly. Marissa stiffened. His presence was comforting and suffocating all at once, a paradox she had long learned to navigate. I was thinking about Elena. She wants to meet tomorrow," Marissa replied, trying to sound casual. Daniel's eyes narrowed, though he masked it with a faint smile. "Tomorrow isn't good. I have plans. You know how important it is for us to stick to our routines." His voice had that calm, measured quality, but the edge was unmistakable, a gentle warning wrapped in concern. Marissa's chest tightened. The conversation had felt like an argument, though no harsh words were exchanged. Small tensions like this one had begun to accumulate, forming invisible fractures in their daily life. She remembered another morning when he had criticized her outfit, then laughed it off as a joke, but the embarrassment lingered, etched in her memory. She walked to the kitchen window, gazing at the quiet street below. Her reflection merged with the dim light, a woman smiling for the world while tension gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. Marissa's love for Daniel had not wavered. She still clung to it, even as fear began to seep into its corners. Fear and resentment quietly intertwining, making her question the cost of this devotion. A sharp knock startled her. Daniel stood there, casual but deliberate, observing her like a predator. "You're quiet tonight. Everything okay?" "Just thinking," she murmured, voice tight. "You always think too much," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Let's not overcomplicate life. Stick with me." Marissa nodded, but a ripple of defiance stirred beneath the surface. For the first time, she wondered if love could justify living in constant tension. Could devotion survive the weight of fear, control, and the subtle suffocation she had begun to notice? And yet, as she followed him to the dining room, she carried that question silently, a seed planted for choices she had yet to imagine. Marissa lingered in the study, pretending to tidy the scattered papers on Daniel's desk. She hadn't meant to glance at the locked drawer, but curiosity pressed her fingers against the smooth wood. The drawer clicked open under her touch. Inside, she found stacks of financial documents she had never seen before, receipts with unfamiliar names, and a small envelope marked private. Her chest tightened. The neat, ordered life Daniel had presented was starting to crumble before her eyes. Later that night, she picked up his phone, hesitating as the screen lit up. A string of messages from an unknown contact made her heart race. Cryptic, affectionate words, punctuated by dates she didn't recognize. A name appeared briefly, Claire, and the pulse of betrayal surged through her veins. How long had this been hidden? How carefully had he curated this alternate life? Daniel appeared in the doorway, casual and smiling. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked. His tone was light, but there was a quiet watchfulness behind his eyes. Marissa's hand lingered over the phone. "Just checking some emails," she murmured, trying to sound neutral. He moved closer, placing a hand over hers. "Curiosity can be dangerous, you know." The words were playful, but the unspoken warning hung in the air like smoke. Marissa withdrew, feeling both fear and a strange defiance swelling inside her. Sleep eluded her that night. Shadows crept across the walls, dancing as if mocking her. She retraced the history of their relationship, replaying conversations, anniversaries, trips, moments that now seemed tainted by the possibility of lies. The laughter they shared, the quiet touches now carried a whisper of deceit. By morning, she had begun digging subtly into Daniel's past. Old emails, long-deleted social media messages, and distant acquaintances revealed glimpses of a life he had carefully masked. Infidelity? Financial secrecy? The line between protection and manipulation blurred, leaving her dizzy with uncertainty. A brief confrontation erupted at breakfast. "Where were you last weekend?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Out with colleagues." "You worry too much?" he replied, the practiced calm in his voice making her doubt her own instincts. Yet something in his eyes, a flicker of annoyance, a shadow of guilt, confirmed her suspicions. Marissa's love, intense and unwavering, was now entwined with fear and suspicion. She realized that the man she adored, who once seemed flawless, carried secrets that threatened everything she thought she knew. And as she watched him sip his coffee, the quiet storm of doubt and determination settled in her mind. She knew, without fully admitting it yet, that uncovering these secrets would change everything, and perhaps it would be the first step toward reclaiming her own sense of power in a life that had begun to feel like a carefully constructed cage. Marissa woke before dawn, unable to shake the restless tension that had been building over the past few days. The shadows in their bedroom seemed to shift and stretch with a life of their own, and the quiet hum of the street outside was deafening in its insistence. Her mind replayed Daniel's words from the night before, twisting them in ways that made her question her own memory. "You're imagining things again. Why do you always overthink?" She had confronted him about the messages, the secret finances, the inconsistencies in his stories, but Daniel had a talent for turning her concerns into a reflection of her own insecurities. He leaned close, calm, almost soothing. "Marissa, you're letting your imagination run wild. You're seeing problems where there aren't any. Trust me, you're making this bigger than it is." His hand rested lightly on hers, but the subtle pressure conveyed an unspoken dominance that left her uneasy. Days blurred into nights. Every glance, every casual comment from Daniel became a potential trap. Was the smudge on his shirt a mark of guilt or a trick of the light? Had she really seen that message, or had her mind created it in a moment of paranoia? Marissa's sleep grew fractured, punctuated by dreams of betrayal. Daniel laughing with unseen women, her hands reaching for evidence that always slipped through her fingers. The living room, once a place of comfort, now seemed suffocating. The quiet ticking of the clock on the mantel echoed the rhythm of her mounting anxiety. She began to retrace conversations in her head, dissecting every syllable, searching for hidden meanings, wondering if she had misremembered, misinterpreted, or simply imagined the signs of his duplicity. Each day, the line between reality and doubt blurred further. During dinner, a simple question from Marissa ignited a subtle confrontation. "Daniel, can we talk about last weekend?" He sighed, the faintest frown crossing his face. "We already discussed this. You're worrying over nothing again. I don't know why you insist on creating problems out of thin air." His voice was calm, but it carried a precision that cut deeper than any shout. Marissa felt herself shrinking, the courage to speak dissolving under his gaze. That night, she sat in the corner of their bedroom, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the floor as the room seemed to tilt around her. Her reflection in the darkened window was a distorted, fearful version of herself. The whispers in her mind, fed by Daniel's manipulations, told her she was losing touch with reality. Yet a small ember of doubt, her own instinct, her own sense of justice refused to die, Marissa realized, with a sinking certainty that if she wanted to preserve her sanity, she could not rely on anyone else. She would have to see the truth for herself. And in that quiet, tense moment, she began to understand the dangerous duality of love and fear, a duality that would soon push her toward choices she had never imagined. The rain fell in thin, persistent sheets that evening, drumming against the roof and blurring the streetlights into hazy halos. Marissa's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she retrieved the mail, a thin envelope sticking out from the pile. Inside was a letter with no return address, only a brief note. "Be careful whom you trust. Some shadows are closer than they appear." Her pulse quickened. Later, at the local cafe, she noticed a man at a corner table, observing the patrons with a quiet intensity. Detective Harris. His name had appeared in the news once, an investigator known for taking on unsolved local cases, but Marissa didn't know he would intersect with her life. Their first conversation was cautious, almost incidental. "Marissa Reynolds?" he asked, voice low, precise, as if he had been expecting her. She blinked, startled. "Yes, do we know each other?" "Not exactly," Harris said, a faint smile flickering across his face. "I'm looking into some local incidents. I noticed your address in public records. It's nothing to worry about. But some patterns." His words were cryptic, and his gaze lingered just long enough to make her uneasy. Over the next few days, they exchanged brief phone calls. Harris asked questions about Daniel, casually at first. Routines, habits, unusual behavior. Marissa hesitated each time, wary of revealing too much. Yet in his quiet professionalism, she found a strange relief. His inquiries mirrored the concerns she had been suppressing, validating the unease she could not name aloud. One evening, after Daniel had gone out on one of his business trips, she whispered into the phone, "I don't know if I'm imagining things, but he's not who he appears to be." Harris didn't respond with judgment. He only asked questions that made her reflect. "What makes you feel that way? What have you seen that doesn't fit the picture?" His patience forced her to think clearly, to notice patterns she had been too afraid to acknowledge. As the days unfolded, Marissa began connecting dots that once seemed invisible. The late-night calls, the secretive glances, the meticulous control he exerted over her small movements. Harris became a mirror, showing her that Daniel's power was not benign. The subtle fear that had lodged itself in her chest transformed into a tangible realization. She was living under someone else's rules, and no one could see the danger except herself. By the time she hung up the phone that night, the rain had stopped. She stared out the window at the empty street, the quiet after the storm reflecting her newfound clarity. Harris was not her savior, nor was he a friend, but he was a catalyst, a shadow in the background who gave her the courage to acknowledge the truth. For the first time in months, Marissa considered her own strength. And in that fragile, flickering moment, a dangerous thought began to take shape, a thought that would change everything. Marissa sat in the dim light of her bedroom, a journal open on her lap. The quiet hum of the city outside her window faded as memories pulled her back years, to the first time she had met Daniel. He had appeared at a mutual friends gathering, effortless charm radiating from him. His laugh had been intoxicating, his gaze intense yet tender. She remembered the way he had made her feel noticed, special, as though the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Long walks through parks in autumn, dinners lit by flickering candlelight, whispered conversations that stretched until dawn. Daniel had been attentive, almost overwhelmingly so, remembering the smallest details. Her favorite flowers, the way she stirred her coffee, the songs that made her smile. For a long time she had believed that love was simply this: intensity, devotion, a world built exclusively around one another. But now, sitting alone, those memories had a sharp edge. She remembered the first time she had noticed the control beneath the charm. It was subtle at first, a gentle nudge disguised as concern. "You don't need to go to that party," he had said, voice warm. "I'll handle things here. It's better if you stay home." At the time, she had laughed, thinking he was protective. Later, she would realize how that had been the first thread in a pattern she had been too blind, or too trusting, to see. There were other moments, small but telling. The criticism disguised as jokes, the insistence on knowing her schedule, the subtle way he redirected conversations when she dared to disagree. Back then they seemed minor, inconsequential. But now, in the harsh light of the present, they were warnings she had ignored, shadows of control wrapped in charisma. Marissa's chest ached as she traced the timeline of their love, feeling both the warmth of intimacy and the cold undercurrent of dominance. She remembered how she had believed her love could bend around imperfections, how she had justified discomfort as part of the excitement of being chosen so intensely. And yet, that same intensity had become a cage, invisible but inescapable. Her mind wandered to nights when Daniel's hands lingered too long, or his compliments were tinged with expectation. The tension of remembering collided with the unease of her current life, creating a cocktail of longing and fear. She had once thought the intensity of their bond was proof of love. Now she understood it had been the blueprint for control, for entrapment. Marissa closed her journal, the pen trembling in her fingers. Love, she realized, was not simply devotion. It was the fine line between enchantment and manipulation, between passion and possession. And as she stared into the darkened room, she understood that understanding the past was the only way to navigate the perilous present. The shadows of who Daniel had been, and who he truly was, clung to her, urging her to awaken, to see clearly, to decide. And in that realization, she felt the stirrings of a plan forming, quiet and dangerous, waiting for the right moment. The house felt smaller each day, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Daniel's presence was constant, suffocating, even when he wasn't physically there. He monitored her phone calls, questioned her about errands, and reminded her, subtly but unmistakably, that she owed him her obedience. Every minor misstep was met with a cold smile, a whispered reproach, or a pointed look that made her stomach knot with unease. Marissa had learned to move carefully through their home, her footsteps measured, her words considered. But the tension was unbearable, a low hum in her chest that refused to be silenced. She began noticing things she had ignored before: the small cameras he'd installed under shelves, the duplicate keys he insisted on keeping, the way he would glance at her face for signs of dissent during conversations. One evening, as he lingered near the doorway of the study, she could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical force. "You've been quiet today," he said, casual but loaded with meaning. "Is something bothering you?" His voice was soft, yet every syllable carried a quiet menace. Marissa's mind raced. She wanted to respond, to assert herself, but the fear of provoking him made her hesitate. That night, after he had gone to bed, she sat on the floor of their bedroom, notebook in hand, cataloging every slight, every manipulation, every small lie. It was a mental ledger, a map of control and deceit. As she wrote, a dangerous clarity emerged. If she continued to bend to his will, she would lose herself entirely. Morality waged war with survival in her mind. Could she act against him without becoming the monster she feared? The next morning brought a confrontation. Daniel had discovered she had checked her emails late at night, a minor intrusion by his standards. Yet he treated it as a betrayal. "Why do you feel the need to hide things from me?" he demanded, voice sharp. Marissa felt her pulse spike. The room seemed to tilt around her, the sunlight through the window casting long, accusing shadows. I just needed some space," she stammered, her hands trembling slightly. "Space? From me?" His eyebrows arched, disbelief mingled with controlled anger. "You know how dangerous it is to create distance between us. Why do you insist on testing limits?" His words cut deeper than any physical blow, leaving Marissa shaken, yet strangely resolute. As he left the room, Marissa exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In the silence, she made a decision. She would no longer wait for circumstances to dictate her life. Small acts of rebellion, securing evidence, tracking his movements, planning conversations, would be her shield. Each calculated step, born of fear and necessity, brought her closer to a truth she had been denying. The man she once adored was a danger, and survival required something darker than she had ever imagined. The breaking point had been reached, and in that quiet, suffocating tension, Marissa's mind began to take shape around a plan, one that would test the limits of morality, love, and fear. Marissa sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, pen poised, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet room. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, a cloak of darkness that mirrored the thoughts swirling in her mind. Each detail mattered, every movement Daniel made, every routine, every trusted friend or neighbor she could manipulate subtly. Nothing could be left to chance. She mapped his daily patterns, the way he brewed coffee precisely at 6:30 a.m., the subtle hesitations when he answered calls, the nights he lingered in the office working late, claiming business matters. She noted his weaknesses, the arrogance that made him predictable, the fleeting distractions that could be exploited. Each observation felt clinical, yet her pulse betrayed the fear, the hatred, and beneath it all the lingering traces of love she could not fully extinguish. The planning was meticulous. She experimented with small diversions, leaving lights on in rooms he never entered, taking unusual routes on errands to see if he noticed. Every misstep or anomaly taught her more about his awareness, his perception, his control. She recorded her findings, balancing the careful precision of a strategist with the tremors of someone teetering on the edge of moral collapse. Yet, the emotional cost was immense. Marissa often found herself staring at his photograph on the mantel, tracing the curve of his smile, remembering the man who had captivated her heart years ago. That memory twisted inside her like a knife. The intensity of her love became inseparable from the fear he now inspired. Planning a murder was an act she had never imagined, yet necessity made it a silent inevitability. She rehearsed conversations in her head, imagining how she would justify her absence, deflect suspicion, maintain composure. Each scenario was a test of her acting skills, her restraint, her ability to live in plain sight while orchestrating something unthinkable. Every call she made, every errand she ran became a piece of the puzzle, an intricate choreography of deception. The house itself became a theater of tension. Shadows flickered in corners as she moved with quiet purpose. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant city sounds, even the occasional creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, echoing the weight of her secret. She felt the eyes of the man she once adored in every room, a ghostly presence that reminded her both of what she had loved and what she feared. By the end of the week, a blueprint had formed in her mind. Timing, alibis, contingencies. She had charted the course so precisely that the act seemed inevitable, mechanical, a balance of intellect and raw emotion. Yet beneath the strategy, her heartbeat betrayed the conflict within. Fear of discovery, hatred of the man he had become, and the faint, haunting love that lingered despite everything. Marissa closed the notebook, taking a deep breath. The plan existed now, solid and cold, ready to be enacted. And in that quiet, tense moment, she understood the truth she had been dancing around for months. There was no turning back. The house was silent, cloaked in darkness, every shadow sharp against the dim glow of the hallway lights. Marissa moved carefully, each step deliberate, her heart hammering in her chest. Tonight, the plan would no longer be theoretical. Every observation, every rehearsal, every contingency she had prepared converged into this one tense, fragile moment. Daniel sat in the living room reading a book, oblivious to the storm of thoughts raging in her mind. The scent of his cologne, once intoxicating, now carried a bitter edge, mingling with fear and suppressed fury. Marissa's hands trembled slightly as she approached him, her movements precise. Rehearsed, yet instinctive panic threatened to betray her. "You've been quiet today," Daniel said casually, looking up from his book. His eyes met hers, calm and unsuspecting. I just wanted to talk," she murmured, trying to steady her voice. "About us." Daniel's smile was soft, misleading, a mask of normalcy. "About us, Marissa? Everything is fine. Don't overthink." Her chest tightened. Fine. Everything was never fine. Memories of manipulation, control, and hidden lies surged behind her eyes, fueling a mixture of grief, hatred, and determination. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing against her ribs, each breath a reminder of what she was about to do. She moved closer, feigning tenderness, a hand brushing against his arm. "I love you, Daniel," she whispered, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. But love isn't enough anymore. Not when fear has crept in. Daniel blinked, confusion flickering across his face, his instinct sensing the shift but unable to name it. "Marissa, what are you saying?" The confrontation was brief, raw, and piercing. One final glance, one subtle hesitation, and the act unfolded with precision born of months of careful planning. Time seemed to stretch, every second suspended in heavy air. The violence was clinical, measured, yet carried the emotional dissonance of a woman who had once adored this man. When it was over, Daniel slumped, lifeless, the room heavy with silence and the scent of inevitability. Marissa stood frozen for a long moment, heart racing, breath shallow. The surreal weight of what she had done pressed down on her, leaving her hollow. She had acted, yet part of her still reached backward, mourning the love that had been twisted into fear. Outside, the city continued unaware, indifferent to the intimate chaos within the house. Shadows of light and darkness flickered across the walls, mimicking the duality she felt, relief and horror, liberation and guilt. Love and rage all intertwined. Marissa sank to the floor, notebook still clutched in her hand, staring at the ceiling as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. The plan had succeeded. Survival, in its coldest form, had been achieved. Yet the emotional toll was immediate, leaving her mind teetering on the edge of comprehension. The night closed around her like a shroud. Nothing would ever be the same, and in that quiet, heavy darkness, Marissa understood the true weight of her choice, a burden she would carry long after the echoes of Daniel's life had faded. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, spilling pale light across the living room, where Daniel no longer sat. Marissa moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything, rehearsing a calm composure that felt fragile, almost performative. The house was quiet, deceptively so, as if holding its breath, aware of the absence she could barely admit. Her phone buzzed intermittently, messages from friends and family arriving in a steady stream. "Where have you been? Is everything okay?" Marissa typed brief, polite responses, each word measured. The scrutiny of her social circle pressed against her, a silent reminder that appearances must remain intact, even as her mind reeled with the enormity of what had occurred. Detective Harris had begun asking questions. Casual at first, probing the edges of her life without revealing the depth of his knowledge. Marissa navigated each inquiry with careful neutrality, yet under her calm exterior, tension coiled tightly. Every step outside the house, every interaction, carried the weight of potential exposure. The balance between outward normalcy and internal chaos was delicate, precarious, and exhausting. Memories of Daniel, the man she had loved, surfaced unbidden. The touch of his hand on hers during quiet mornings, the warmth of his smile before control, had replaced kindness. Those moments clashed violently with the fear and rage that had driven her hand, leaving her emotions tangled and contradictory. Relief mixed uncomfortably with guilt. Liberation was inseparable from loss. At dinner, she overheard whispers from neighbors, questions about his absence, speculations on where he had gone. Marissa's pulse quickened, a familiar tightening in her chest, yet she smiled politely, nodding as if everything were as it had always been. Inside, her thoughts raced, calculating, remembering, reflecting on months of manipulation and control that had led her to this juncture. Night fell, carrying with it the oppressive weight of silence. She sat alone in the dim glow of the living room lamp, notebook in hand, tracing events, reviewing every decision, every emotion, every shadow of her past love and present action. The moral complexity of what she had done, killing the man she once adored, pressed down like a stone in her chest. She understood more clearly than ever that survival and justice were not always aligned with conscience. Despite her careful facade, cracks were beginning to show, tremors in her voice, fleeting hesitations, a glance toward the empty chair where he had sat. Marissa realized that the aftermath of murder was not merely the absence of life, but the relentless presence of consequence. Emotional, social, and psychological. As the city slept outside her window, Marissa allowed herself a brief exhale. The world had not yet caught her, yet the weight of justice loomed like a distant shadow, patient and inevitable. She understood now that silence carried both freedom and fear, and that living with the consequences would be a test far harsher than the act itself. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Marissa's face. Detective Harris sat across from her, pen poised, notebook open, eyes steady and unyielding. The silence stretched thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint ticking of a wall clock. "Marissa," Harris began, voice calm but insistent, "there are inconsistencies in your statements. Your neighbors, your phone records, the timeline doesn't add up. Can you explain that?" Marissa's hands trembled slightly, resting on the table. She met his gaze, careful, calculating. Every word matters. Every pause can betray me. Yet beneath the practiced calm, a flicker of defiance burned. "I did what had to be done. Survival demanded it. I don't know what you mean," she murmured, voice tight, eyes darting briefly toward the door. Harris leaned forward, subtle intensity in his posture. "Marissa, you're not helping yourself. The truth is simpler than you think. Confession will make it easier. For you, for everyone involved." Flashbacks tore through her mind as he spoke. Daniel's controlled smiles, the suffocating mornings, the shadows that had stalked her every step, each memory layered on top of the next, creating a tapestry of manipulation, fear, and love turned toxic. The notebook on her table seemed to pulse under her fingers, a silent witness to the months of planning and emotional toil. She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. It was him. He controlled everything. I had to." The words faltered, but the weight behind them carried years of suppressed fear and twisted justification. "I loved him, yes, but fear was stronger than love." Harris remained silent, letting her speak, allowing the truth to unfold from her own lips. Marissa continued, each sentence measured yet laden with emotion. The planning, the rehearsals, the careful execution, all recounted with a clinical precision interlaced with glimpses of the woman who had once adored him. "Did you ever think about consequences?" Harris asked quietly, almost gently. Marissa looked down, tracing the scratches in the table. "Of course. Every day, but I couldn't live under him anymore. He had to stop. And no one else could do it. Not law, not friends, not anyone. Only me." Her words carried a detached finality, a cold rationalization for an act born of fear, love, and moral compromise. The room fell silent again, save for the steady scratching of Harris's pen. Outside, the world continued unaware, yet inside that small, bright room, reality had shifted irreversibly. Marissa had spoken, laid bare her psyche, her planning, and her fractured morality. As Harris closed his notebook, he studied her carefully, a mixture of professional curiosity and quiet awe in his eyes. Marissa leaned back, her hands still trembling, a hollow relief settling into her chest. The act was done, the truth confessed, yet the emotional weight remained heavy and inescapable. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel both liberation and despair. Justice had arrived, not only from the law but from the inevitability of facing the consequences of her choices. And as the door closed behind the detective, Marissa understood the full measure of her actions. Love had twisted into fear. Fear had led to murder, and the truth, once revealed, could never be unseen. The fluorescent lights of the prison interview room cast a cold, sterile glow across Marissa's face. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her posture upright, but the depth in her eyes betrayed years of confinement, reflection, and unspoken torment. Across from her, the documentary crew adjusted cameras, their equipment humming softly, capturing every nuance of her expression. Marissa spoke slowly, deliberately, her voice calm but tinged with emotion. Love. Love can be intoxicating, suffocating, even deadly, she said. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I loved him. More than I should have. More than I ever knew was safe. And that love turned into something darker than either of us could have imagined. The interviewer nodded, silent, allowing her to continue. People think they know the story from the outside, from the headlines, from whispers in the street. But love is rarely simple. It has a weight, a cost, and sometimes the cost is unbearable. I was trapped by devotion, by fear, by a need to survive that no one could see or understand. Flashbacks emerged in her mind as she spoke. The meticulous planning, the suffocating control, the quiet moments of terror beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect marriage. Each memory carried the duality of passion and dread, illustrating the paradox of her existence. Intense love intertwined with suffocating fear. Years had passed since that night, yet the shadows lingered. Marissa's reflections were sharp, her narration tinged with both regret and rationalization. I committed the act to reclaim my life, she admitted. And yet, I lost a part of myself in the process. Love doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it blinds you, drives you to choices you never thought you could make. The crew captured her pauses, the subtle tremor of her hands, the distant look in her eyes. Every frame spoke of moral compromise, obsession, and the lingering psychological cost of betrayal. Marissa's story was no longer just about a man and a woman, a crime of passion, or a sensational headline. It was a cautionary tale about the fragility of trust, the destructive potential of secrecy, and the dangerous extremes of devotion. As the cameras stopped rolling, Marissa leaned back, the interview concluded. Yet the weight of her reflection remained. Outside the prison walls, life continued unaware, indifferent to the complex darkness that had unfolded within her home years ago. In the quiet aftermath, she understood the enduring truth. Love, when twisted by control and obsession, leaves scars far deeper than the physical. And the legacy of her dark love, a mixture of passion, fear, and moral compromise, would remain, a silent testament to the cost of devotion gone too far. Marissa exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the distant horizon beyond the bars. Justice had been served, yet its shadow lingered, a reminder that even love can become lethal when left unchecked.